Turn off the lights, turn the volume up, and stay with me until the end. This story only works if you witness what I witnessed, all the way through. Chapter 1, The First Grin. I was on my 13th hour at the overnight crisis clinic when the woman arrived with a smile that didn't belong on her face. The front desk called her a walk-in, but she looked like a storm that had learned to wear a mask. Her name was Nadine, though I'm not sure if that was true. Everything about her felt like a rehearsed lie, like she had practiced being human and gotten the rhythm wrong. "I'm not sick," she told me, taking the starch-white chair in my office. It found me. I wanted to be kind, authoritative, professional, the way they train you when your job is to hold someone's world steady for 100 minutes. I asked about medications, sleep, her support network. She smiled wider, the way a child drags a crayon too hard and the line goes off the page. "It wears faces," she said. "Sometimes mine. Sometimes yours. It waits until I'm almost not afraid anymore. Then it smiles so I'll know I can't stop it." We had a policy for delusions: ground in the present, orient to the body, give options. I took out a grounding card and slid it across. "What are 5 things you can see?" Nadine didn't look down. She leaned forward in her chair, pupils saucered. For a heartbeat I saw my own reflection in her eyes, the fluorescent rectangle of the ceiling light, my face cut into pieces by the glare. She whispered, "It wants you to see. That's how it moves." I followed procedure. I called for a safe room. We were supposed to keep them from sharp things and from stories that spread like mold. But the clinic was understaffed, the safe room occupied with a teenager who breathed like a ticking bomb. I stayed with Nadine, kept my tone even, my eyes soft. She stood suddenly, that terrible smile welded in place, and knocked my mug to the floor. Porcelain cracked into a bright, jagged mouth at our feet. For an impossible second, her posture loosened, as if the thing inside her had moved to stretch. "Don't look," she said, though I was already looking. "It needs an audience." The rest was motion and shouting, a bead of red, a drag of emergency protocol that we were too slow to pull. I won't describe the act, not because I don't remember, but because memory is a lit fuse, and if I light it for you, it might not stop at the end of this sentence. I'm telling you only this: the last thing I saw was the wrongness of that smile, the way it seemed painted from the inside. She died before the gurney arrived. And the room, my room, held a silence with teeth. Chapter 2, Static. I took the night off the next night and the next. The clinic offered support services, which meant a pamphlet and 2 calls I didn't return. The apartment felt like a waiting room, my couch a chair that never warmed. I left the TV on for company, made myself something salty to chew through the quiet. That's when the static began. Not on the screen. In the corners, in the places where the dust hangs and you forget to look. I'd turn my head and catch the flicker, a ripple in the air, like a broadcast from a channel between channels. I told myself it was sleep debt. I told myself guilt could hum, and if I listened long enough it would pick a tune I knew. 2 nights after, the static learned a shape. I was brushing my teeth, the mirror milky with steam, when the fog cleared itself into a mouth. Not a real mouth, not skin and muscle, but a glossed-on grin where my own lips should have been. It didn't belong to my face, it belonged to the room behind me, to the mirror itself. It was too generous a smile, as if whatever wore it wanted to prove it could be friendly if I just agreed to be afraid. I threw the door open, and the shape shattered, not like a reflection, but like a radio dropping a signal. I stood with the toothpaste stinging my tongue, my chest lifting the way a child lifts a blanket to check for monsters. After that, it escalated. The sound of a camera shutter in empty hallways. A child's laughter braided with the low buzz of an old television. I found a folded paper on my kitchen counter, a small white square I did not own, that had been creased and uncreased so many times the edges were soft. On the inside was a smile. Not drawn. Stamped. Repeated, perfectly, in a line that never ended. I sat on the floor with my back against the fridge, cold humming against my spine, and realized there was a taste in my mouth, copper, old pennies pressed to the tongue. It made me think of Nadine, of the way the room had tasted after she left it. I wanted to tell someone. I thought of calling my sister, but she lived 2 time zones away and had a baby who woke for nothing less than earthquakes. I thought of calling Mateo, who had once loved me loud and messy and who knew how to talk me down from ledges I didn't admit I had. Instead, I searched the internet for patterns of smiling hallucinations. I found a forum where people wrote about the grin beneath the skin, about faces that wore other faces, about videos that hurt you if you watched them alone. An account with a username that read like static, just a line of symbols, sent me a message, "You saw. Now it sees you." Below it was a link. I didn't click it. I closed my laptop and felt the room lean toward me, as if to listen to the sound of my fear. Chapter 3, The Chain. I went back to the clinic because the world made more sense with fluorescent light buzzing overhead and people crying where crying is expected. I signed the sign-in sheet with a hand that felt borrowed. The chair legs screeched when I took my spot at the intake desk, a high sound like the scream of metal. Frankie, the nurse who knew everyone's business before they did, brought me a coffee and lowered her voice. "You hear about room 4 last week?" She meant my office. I nodded. She squeezed my shoulder. "It gets under your nails. You'll wash and wash." I didn't want pity. I wanted information. In the files, the woman had listed a boyfriend, a friend, an ex-professor. I shouldn't have used the emergency contact list for anything but a courtesy call, but curiosity is a shape a person slips into when they can't stand the shape of their own life. I called the ex-professor first, a man whose voice sounded grated and tired. I tried to tell her it wasn't real, he said, as if we were mid-conversation. But then it turned up in the lecture hall at noon. 100 kids and only I saw it. Smiling at me from the back row. After class, I found a note on my car. No words, just a curve drawn in thick black ink. "Have you been sleeping?" I asked. He didn't answer. "Has anything unusual happened to you since she died?" He went quiet enough that the line began to sound like a seashell. "I didn't watch," he said finally. "When she called, when she said she was going to do it." I hung up. "I didn't watch. That's why it picked you." I ended the call with a mouth that couldn't make the shape of thank you. From there, the story spread itself out like a map. I followed threads I had no right to pull. A sister in a different town who said her husband had fallen into a darkness no doctor could name after he witnessed a coworker's final act. A barista who'd quit because she saw a customer smile with a mouth that didn't stop when it should. A social worker who now wore a thin silver ring etched with tiny lines that might have been teeth. Each person had a version of the same thing, witness, then weeks of wrongness, then an end that turned witnesses into carriers. It isn't that the thing needed a death, I realized. It needed an audience. It craved the way our eyes bless a moment with reality. Death was just the door it liked best. If you think I'm being poetic, I'm not. I'm being precise. I printed the stories and pinned them to my wall. The chain didn't go back years or decades. It went back and back, farther than printing presses, older than language that can be traced. Not a pandemic. A folklore with teeth. I visited a man in the county jail who had been accused of killing his neighbor because he believed the neighbor was mimicking his smile. The man looked at my face and giggled with a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "It's already behind you," he said, and for a heartbeat I felt a warmth on my neck, a breath that wasn't air. When I turned, there was nothing but the shadow of the fluorescent bulb, which looked, in that moment, like a grin hanging from the ceiling. Chapter 4, Wearing My Face. On the 7th night after Nadine had brought her grin into my life, my doorbell rang at 3:12 a.m. No one decent rings at 3:12 a.m. I went to the peephole and found my own eye looking back. It took a second to understand. The peephole turned my face into a fishbowl. On the other side stood someone wearing my expression with the volume turned up. My mouth, my cheeks, my brow, but as if they'd been taught to smile by a photograph. She lifted a hand, my hand, and bent her knuckles against the wood in 3 gentle taps. Elena, she whispered, using my name only my mother used that way. Or maybe she didn't say it at all, maybe the hallway said it for her. The building was quiet. The air seemed held. I thought of my neighbor, a nurse who worked days and slept like a felled tree. I thought of the security camera in the lobby, one dull red eye that blinked every time the elevator did. I thought of the chain, of how it needed to be seen to move. I turned off the lamp and pressed my back to the wall. "Go away," I mouthed, to the dark. She laughed. It sounded exactly like me when I laugh at something I shouldn't. When the morning came, I found a smeared print on my door, not a handprint, but something that implied touch without actually being one. It was shaped like a crescent, as if someone had pressed their smile to the paint until the outline transferred. By then, I had a plan. Plans are the last handhold before people begin to slide. I called Matteo, because I needed someone who knew my edges, who could tell me when the shape of my fear had eaten the shape of me. He answered and said my name in a way that made me almost cry. "Come over," I said. "But don't look at me if I tell you not to." He arrived with coffee and a set of track marks under his eyes that told me sleep had been a rumor for him too. He looked at me the way a person looks at home when they haven't been inside in a long time. "You look like the version of you who pretends to be fine," he said softly. "You always smile when you're falling apart." "Don't say that word," I said, and he didn't, though our faces knew it was in the room. I had rehearsed my story. How the woman at the clinic had burned me into a pattern I couldn't scrub off. How I had followed threads that led to a knot that couldn't be untied. How the thing wore faces like clothes and loved to be watched. Matteo listened, then did the worst thing, he believed me. He believed me so quickly I felt my plan tilt. "How do we stop it?" he asked. "Some people think it can be tricked," I said. "Starved. That if you take yourself where no one can witness the ending, it can't step over the threshold. It doesn't want the death. It wants the audience." He looked at the window, the city beyond it a grid of square, lit mouths. "Where do we go to not be seen?" he said with a near smile that wasn't the kind the thing liked. It was human, creased with sadness. "The world watches everything." "There's a place," I said, and I hated that I had an answer. The swimming pool from my childhood, drained and closed, an empty oval that had felt like adventure then. There was no security camera, the town had not cared enough to protect a space nobody used. It smelled like chlorine and summers that never ended. It would still be there. Not a perfect solution. An old habit. "If we go," he said, "and if it happens, I won't be there. I can't be." Do you understand what I'm saying? I did. It felt like kindness ground into a pill I couldn't swallow. "I won't let you watch me," I said. "I promise." Chapter 5, The Deep End. The pool had become a concrete bowl for rain and leaves and occasional teenagers. We drove out at dusk, because the line between day and night is when most things are vulnerable: deer crossing, people confessing, haunted houses admitting their ghosts. The chain-link fence bent easily under our hands. I felt like a child again, breaking rules that only existed to keep us from being alive. The sky was a bruise, purple leaking into blue. In the deep end, our footsteps made soft scuffs that sounded like someone else trailing us. "Here," I said, pointing to where the drain had once been, a dark circle like an eye. "If it's going to try, it'll try here." Matteo took my face in both hands. His palms were warm, human. "If you want to run," he said, "I'll run with you. We'll outrun a story." "I don't think it needs legs," I said. "Stories don't." He stepped back, put distance between us like a steel beam. "Say when," he said. "And I'll look away." The static came low and then high, like an ambulance in the distance curling around a hill. I looked up, there were no sirens. I looked to the lip of the pool, no faces peered down. The air thickened anyway, as if thickness itself could be a presence. A figure rose at the far end, wearing a body too approximate to be a person, a copy of a copy. It resembled me and then didn't, shifting the way heat does over asphalt. "Don't look," I said to Matteo. "No matter what, don't." He turned, obedient, and stared at the concrete wall. His shoulders were rigid, a silent scream traveling across them. The figure approached with a gait like a barrow. Its smile began at a place where a face would meet a face, except the edges didn't line up. It raised a hand and I recognized the motion as mine, the way I wave cars through four-way stops when the rules confuse me, the way I try to be gracious in the wrong places. It showed me my own compassion as a puppet on a stick. "You can't have me," I said to it, "because you have to say something, because silence is a room it likes to decorate." It tilted its head. When it spoke, it used the voice of people I loved threaded through a speaker. "I don't need you," it said. "I need him." I moved fast then, fast enough to hurt. I put the drain between us, because my child brain believed the deep end had rules. "No," I said, loud enough that the word came back to me from the bowl of concrete. "He won't see." I had brought something without telling him, a box of matches, the cheap kind that snap if you're rough, and a small bottle of lighter fluid I told the cashier at the gas station was for a campsite that didn't exist. Fire is how humans draw lines. Fire is how we say no further to things that don't understand words. I poured a circle at my feet, struck a match, and made a ring. It guttered, then caught. The air felt like the mouth of a stove. The figure paused, smiled wider, as if amused by my kindergarten magic. The fire cast the two of us on the walls. My shadow's grin was not mine. It was wider, more patient. It looked almost tender. "I know what you did," I told it, though I didn't. "I know you took 1,000 faces and laid them on top of each other until none of us could tell who we were." It nodded, as if to say yes, and then it did the one thing I wasn't ready for. It turned, slow and sure, to face the opposite wall where Matteo stood staring at the concrete, his hands in fists, knuckles pale. "Don't," I said. "Don't look." "I won't," he said, and I believed him. He kept his eyes down. He began to hum, off-key, the song his mother had sung to him when he was small and sick. He hummed to drown out the static. The figure took one step, then another, until it stood behind him, a thought perched on his shoulder. It leaned close enough that if it had breath, it would have warmed his ear. It smiled at the back of his head, a smile meant for the invisible. I understood the strategy then, the way it had learned how to worm through loopholes. It didn't need his eyes. It needed mine on him while it smiled. If I watched it grin at his turned head, that would count. Witness enough. Door unlocked. I closed my eyes. But you cannot close the mind. There are places inside the lids where pictures live. The static turned into shapes behind my shut eyes, and I saw it anyway, the way you see the sun on the back of your eyelids after a day at the beach. The grin burned into a pattern that belonged to me now, whether I wanted it or not. "Please," I said, and I didn't know if I was begging the thing, Matteo, or the world. He heard me as if from a distance. "I'm here," he said. "I'm with you." The ring of fire hissed in a small, constant anger. Somewhere a siren finally was real. It grew louder, and with it a weight settled behind the sound, understanding so low and fundamental I almost mistook it for the heartbeat of the earth. The chain was older than any of us. We were not the story's beginning, and we would not be its end. Chapter 6, Last Light. The security guard found us, two silhouettes circling a lit ring, a third shape that the camera would later claim was a trick of light. He shouted and the shout ricocheted. His flashlight cut the dark into slices, the beam swinging, searching for reason. "Don't come down," I yelled, but it sounded like an invitation. He climbed anyway, one shoe slipping on the chipped tile, the light staring at us like a blunt eye. The figure was delighted. It turned its smile toward the new witness as one might offer a glass of water to a parched stranger. I felt the chain shiver, a string plucked in a song I didn't want to learn. "Move," Matteo said, voice crisp for the first time, soldier sharp. He took a step to block the guard's view. He made himself a wall. He became the kind of brave that gets people killed. Don't be heroic, I said. Be small. Be boring. The guard paused at the lip of the pool, the flashlight trembling. It flicked from me to Matteo to the ring of fire, taking a story he would later tell himself and sanding off all its edges. He put one foot inside the bowl, then the other. He slid, caught himself, cursed. When his light rose, it met my face. I made a choice then that felt like taking my own hand and moving it in a way it didn't want to go. I stepped backward into the circle until the heat licked my calves and then my thighs. I wanted to pull away, and I didn't. I thought of Nadine and the wrongness of that smile and of the professor and the barista and the man in the jail who heard laughter where no one else could. I thought of my sister's baby, of a stranger's child, of 100 students in a lecture hall at noon. I thought of the chain and of being the place where it snagged and frayed. I'm sorry, I said to Matteo. Don't look. He didn't, but he reached out a hand and found air. I can't fix it, he said, and somehow it was both the worst and the most beautiful thing he had ever said. The figure tilted its head, curious. It wasn't angry. Anger would have made it human. It was interested the way a scientist is interested in the behavior of ants. It adjusted its smile like a lens. The guard's foot knocked his flashlight from his hand. It clattered, spun, and came to rest shining into the circle. The fire made it gutter. The beam found my knee, my hands, my face. The guard sucked in a breath as if stepping into cold ocean. He saw. Not me. The thing wearing me. He saw it smile. I watched his mouth begin to form the syllable of a word that could have been a prayer or a curse. We stood in a geometry drawn for us by something that loved shapes, witness, watched, watcher. The chain closed like a door. The sirens arrived. Red and blue made the empty bowl a heartbeat. The figure flickered, as if satisfied. It stepped back into the static it came from, as if it had shaved off a piece of itself to leave with us. They asked me questions. I arranged my answers into something administratively digestible. No, I had not set a fire with intent to harm. Yes, I had been trying to prevent a harm. The guard sat on the curb and stared at an unlit cigarette he couldn't bring himself to light. In the hospital, they gave me a room with a window and a clock. The window showed a tree that had lost its leaves early, as if it knew the season had shifted. The clock's tick made a sound that kept me on the right side of the present moment. A therapist with soft eyes asked me to describe what I'd seen. I gave her outlines. She nodded, as if outlines were enough. At night I felt the grin in the vents. It wasn't a face, not exactly, it was an idea with edges that cut. I understood that I hadn't given it a new meal. I had only set its table. When they discharged me, I walked home slowly, counting cracks in the sidewalk, grounding myself in something the way the pamphlet suggested. At my door, there was another print, not a smile this time, but a straight line, as if the thing wanted me to know it had range. Inside, my apartment was exactly as I'd left it, a couch pretending to be a chair from the clinic, a television that could be a window if I stared long enough. I checked the lobby camera footage because I could. It showed a blank, blue-tinted night, then the guard entering, then me and Matteo, then a flicker that the timestamp called a glitch. It showed nothing that would satisfy any court, and everything I needed to know. The grin did not need proof. It only needed proximity. If you're still with me, you know what comes next. The guard will lay down in his bed one night and the static will learn the weight of his ceiling fan. He'll hear laughter and then he won't. Someone will see him gone with a smile that doesn't fit, and in that last witness will be the seed of another beginning. Matteo will move to a city where the air doesn't taste like old pennies, and he will call me and we will not talk about rings of fire, only about weather and small deviations from normal days. And I will learn to live inside the smallest possible version of myself, leaving as little audience as I can. But sometimes, late, the television turns itself onto an empty channel, and I sit in the glow, and I think, maybe the chain is not the thing's invention. Maybe it's ours. Maybe we were the audience first and forever, and something old wore a smile to help us understand what we'd always been doing, staring, naming, blessing with our eyes. If you're still watching, if your eyes have carried this to the end, then you're part of it too. I'm sorry. I'm grateful. Both can be true. I ask one last small kindness. If you feel the static lean against your cheek, if a shape behind your eyelids begins to smile, don't give it a stage. Sit in the dark of your own life for a while. Let it be lonelier than it knows how to be. If my story held you to the last word, please subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, give this video a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share the video with someone who loves a good scare.